Granville Stuart, honored as Mr. Montana, played a pivotal role in the state's formative years. He and his brother, James Stuart, were among the first to search for gold in the wilderness that would eventually become Montana. Their discoveries sparked the Great Montana Gold Rush of the early 1860s, after they wrote to their third brother in Colorado, detailing their findings. Granville was also actively involved in the bustling mining communities of Bannack in 1862 and Virginia City in 1863, where he was a key figure in the Vigilante movement that quelled the infamous outlaw outfit, led by Henry Plummer. Throughout his life, Stuart spent time in various industries, working as a sawmill operator, gunsmith, butcher, horse trader, rancher, and diplomat. Despite his busy career, he also served double terms on the Territorial Council, including one term as president. However, Stuart is best acknowledged for his contributions as a cattleman. He brought cattle to the Montana Territory in the early 1860s, and in 1879, he partnered with 3 others to establish the DHS Ranch, taking on the roles of superintendent and general manager. He set up the ranch headquarters on Ford's Creek, not all that far from what is now Lewistown, Montana. To protect the settlers in Judith Basin from the various local native tribes, such as the Lakota, the military established Fort McGinnis on DHS land in 1880. By 1883, Stuart's ranch was home to 12,000 shorthorn cattle, generating significant returns. That same year, Stuart noticed a 3% loss in cattle at the fall roundup, primarily due to the growing issue of cattle rustlers. This problem was widespread, affecting many ranchers, both big and small. Stuart noted that some small ranchers increased their herds by taking cattle from larger operations. He recounted a story of a nearby rancher whose cows consistently had multiple calves, while the range cows remained barren, leading to threats of hanging if the suspiciously high birth rates continued. More troubling were the organized gangs of thieves operating in the territory. These well-coordinated networks were an evolved form of the one-off cattle rustlers that had been plaguing the territory. The gangs stole cattle in one area and sold them in another, often across the Canadian border. By the late 1870s, ranchers began forming stock growers associations to push for legislative measures to combat theft. In the 1883 legislative session, cattlemen managed to pass a bill placing a bounty on wild predators like coyotes and wolves. But their key proposal, House Bill 49, was vetoed. This bill would have established a board of livestock commissioners who could then employ up to 6 livestock inspectors. These cattle detectives would then withhold the ability to arrest suspected rustlers, even if they didn't carry a warrant. Territorial Governor John Crosby vetoed it, arguing it imposed unfair taxes and gave inspectors excessive authority. With legal avenues proving ineffective, many ranchers were compelled to stake their claims to vigilante justice, all in the name of protecting their livelihoods. Thus, the impending blueprints of Stuart's Stranglers were ultimately conceived. Unable to find a solution, the Montana Stock Growers Association postponed the discussion of organized cattle rustling until their next meeting in spring 1884. During this period, they agreed to gather detailed information on the rustlers, including the leaders and their hideouts. By the time they reconvened in April 1884, the ranchers were united in wanting to tackle the rustling problem, but were divided on how to proceed. Granville Stuart recounted that some members advocated for assembling a small army of cowboys to attack the rustlers. However, more experienced members, including Stuart, opposed this idea. He argued that the rustlers were well armed, their cabins were like small fortresses, and any conflict could result in significant casualties and legal troubles for the ranchers. Stuart's cautious stance did not resonate with everyone. Younger members, frustrated by the ongoing thefts, were eager to confront the rustlers. Marquis de Morris, a close friend of Stuart and a strong advocate for aggressive action, accused Stuart of being overly cautious. Future U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, a member of the association from Dakota, supported de Morris' stance. Ultimately, the conservative faction prevailed, and the association decided against taking immediate action. When the rustlers learned that the cattlemen had failed to unite against them, they gained even more confidence and shifted their focus to stealing horses. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Stuart decided that swift action was necessary. After receiving intelligence from stock detectives about the main rustlers and their locations, he organized a meeting at his Musselshell River Ranch in June. At this gathering, anxious stockmen, gunslinging cowboys, and association detectives formed a vigilante committee known as Stuart's Stranglers. This group was initially assembled in response to the theft of Stuart's stallion and 35 steers. Led by William Flop and Bill Cantrell, their numbers varied between 17 and 40 men, depending on the circumstances of each manhunt. Their mission? To confront and eliminate the rustler threat directly. The men captured by Stuart's group faced immediate justice, either being wounded in shootouts or hanged. Many were found with signs around their necks labeled thief. The group was known for its lethal efficiency. They were an assembly of sharpshooters, and desperate ones at that. In addition to targeting rustlers and thieves, they also dealt with folk known as range squatters, settlers who claimed land simply by pitching a tent and refusing to leave. One prominent rustler leader was Jack Stringer, known better by his moniker, Stringer Jack. He was a tall, good-looking young man with a friendly demeanor, characterized by piercing gray eyes, perfect white teeth, and a pleasant smile. The words of Stuart himself. Before turning to crime, Stringer had been a buffalo hunter, and although he was not a heavy drinker, he was a habitual gambler. Sam Mackenzie posed as a grizzled wolf hunter by day, but moonlighted as a horse rustler by night. He stole mounts in Montana, drove them to Canada to sell, then lifted Canadian horses and sold them back in Montana. His friends from nearby Cree tribes helped him evade law enforcement along the border. Granville Stuart himself once encountered two outlaws, Charles Rattlesnake Jake Fallon and Edward Long-Haired Owen, while riding his range. Stuart described them as some of the toughest-looking characters he had ever seen, particularly Owen, who had long, messy black hair, shifty greenish-gray eyes, and a cruel expression on his face. Despite his menacing nickname, Rattlesnake Jake did not appear as intimidating as Long-Haired Owen, but still had a rough look. Both men were heavily armed, each carrying 2 Colt .44 revolvers and a hunting knife. When Stuart arrived at their camp, Fallon was cleaning his Winchester rifle, while Owen lounged against a stump, smoking with another Winchester within reach. Owen appeared calm, almost insolent, while Rattlesnake Jake was civil, but kept a wary eye on Stuart. Though Stuart had no grounds to arrest them at the time, he decided to keep a close watch. Stuart later learned that Owen was from Shreveport, Louisiana, where he had killed a man, and Fallon was from Laredo, Texas, wanted in New Mexico for arson and assault. They had also wrestled horses in Wyoming, where they were also wanted by the law. Another notable figure was Billy Downs, a moonshiner, wolf trapper, and above all, a livestock rustler. His hideout at the mouth of the Musselshell River was known refuge for fellow freebooters. Despite just being warned by the cattleman to stop his illegal activities, out of respect for his wife, Downs turned his cheek to the warnings. Other members of the rustler gangs included individuals known by their nicknames: California Ed, Red Mike, Brocky Gallagher, Dutch Louie, Old Man James and his offspring, Frank Hansen, Bill Williams, Patty Rose, Swift Bill, Dixie Burr, Orville Edwards, and Silas Nickerson. For many of these bronco bandits and cattle outcasts, their time enjoying the spoils of plunder on Montana soil was nearing an end, as Independence Day, was approaching on the horizon. At this point in the feud, the gangs of cattle rustlers made the decision easy. Violence appeared to be the only fix, and Stuart acted swiftly. He divided his force into smaller groups and sent them out to capture the criminals. On the 4th of July of 1884, one of these groups targeted Billy Downs and his partner, California Ed, at their hideout on the Musselshell River. They discovered 26 horses in the corral, all marked with brands of local cattle ranchers. They also found a large stash of dried meat, which Downs claimed was buffalo. The only problem? American buffalo hadn't been observed in the region for at least 2 years. Additionally, the Stranglers found stacks of fresh hides in the stable, all bearing the Fergus Stock Company brand. Ignoring the pleas of Downs' wife, the Vigilantes lynched Downs and California Ed in a nearby grove. On the same Independence Day, the townsfolk of Lewistown finally dealt with Rattlesnake Jake Fallon and Long-Haired Owen, who had caused chaos during the holiday celebrations and murdered an innocent bystander. Armed citizens shot and killed both outlaws, their bullets finding targets at least 9 times on Rattlesnake Jake and 11 times on Owen. A few days later, on July 8th, Stuart's group continued their pursuit of Stringer Jack and his gang. They headed to Rocky Point, the headquarters of Red Mike and Brocky Gallagher, only to find that the men had already crossed the river, all of the stolen mounts in tow. The Montana Vigilantes immediately put to the chase and eventually caught Red Mike and Gallagher, recovering every single stolen horse to boot. Stuart reported that both men pleaded guilty, implying they were soon hanged on trees along the Musselshell shores. At Bates Point, 15 miles downstream from the Musselshell River's mouth, was the home of Old Man James, a known hangout for Stringer Jack. Stuart and his vigilantes arrived to find the log cabin, stable, and corral. Nearby, a tent housed several outlaws, including Stringer Jack. The vigilantes split into 3 groups. 3 guarded the tent, 5 surrounded the cabin, and 1 watched the saddle horses. At dawn, they ordered Old Man James to open the corral and drive out the horses. He complied, but refused to surrender himself, firing a shot from his rifle. This triggered a firefight, with bullets flying from all sides of the cabin. 2 vigilantes set fire to a haystack in the cabin. The men inside continued to fight until they were all killed or burned alive. The tent, situated near thick brush by the river, provided an easier escape route. Stringer Jack crawled under the tent and made his last stand in a clump of willows. Dixie Burr, wounded by a bullet, hid in an old well and escaped after dark. Rose Nickerson, Edwards, and Swift Bill also managed to flee in the darkness. Ultimately, most outlaws were either killed or wounded, except for Edwards and Nickerson, who temporarily escaped unharmed. The following morning, Burr joined Nickerson, Edwards, and Swift Bill. They built a makeshift raft to escape down the river, but were intercepted by Fort McGinnis soldiers, who then handed them over to Deputy U.S. Marshal Samuel Fischel in White Sulphur Springs. However, before they could stand before a military tribunal, a posse intercepted the rustlers at the mouth of the Musselshell River, taking the prisoners for themselves. They hanged the 4 men from a log placed between 2 nondescript cabins, which then caught fire, burning down and cremating the bodies. Paddy Rose was the only desperado to evade capture. He traversed to Fort Benton when he lost contact with the others, where wealthy and influential relatives helped him cross the Canadian border to safety. After their final attack at Bates Point, where 160 cattle were being held, Stuart and his men reclaimed their own cattle, leaving 69 behind. Stuart brought these cattle to his ranch and advertised for the owners to retrieve them. Shortly afterward, the vigilante group disbanded. In just a few months, they had returned over 300 horses to their rightful owners. The news of the Stuart vigilante raids spread slowly due to the isolated location and the participants' reluctance to publicize their actions. The editor of the Mineral Argus in Maiden, Montana, endorsed Stuart's mission, arguing that the quickest way to handle thieves was to hang them immediately upon capture. One of the first national stories originated in Salt Lake City on July 21st. Reports from Judith City, northern Montana, reveal that 5 horse thieves were recently caught and hanged near Rocky Point. A group of cowboys has effectively organized to catch thieves, recovering 32 stolen horses and hanging the culprits. By July 26th, faraway locales, such as Dunkirk, New York, saw their newspapers report the following. Cattle ranchers in Montana Territory, facing a wave of horse and cattle thefts, have either hanged or shot 13 thieves in 3 weeks, with 5 hanged at Rocky Point on the upper Missouri River. On July 30th, a dispatch from Helena noted that the bodies of 7 horse rustlers were still dangling at the mouth of the Musselshell River, while 20 of Stuart's Stranglers were still chasing another group. Over 100 horses had been retrieved in the previous week, with an estimated 50 thieves hanged or shot in the past month. Throughout August, more reports emerged. An August 3rd outline stated ranchers and stock raisers were aggressively targeting horse and cattle thieves. A letter found on a recently captured and hanged thief described a gang of 75 to 100 thieves operating between the Missouri and Yellowstone rivers. The Vigilantes were rounding up these thieves, with an estimated 20 killed thus far, and others fleeing. A couple of days later, a local courier suggested that Stuart's cowboys had captured another large group of horse thieves near the Musselshell River. Reinforcements were expected, and a confrontation loomed. On August 8th, a report from Helena described the Bates Point battle as another slaughter of horse thieves, with 9 killed and 5 escaping. The cabin was burned, as the community was determined to end the thefts. An August 16th edition stated that at Rocky Point, vigilante cowboys captured 5 horse thieves and recovered 32 horses. Less than a week later, on August 22nd, the papers read, "Near Helena, Montana, the other day, 14 horse thieves were attacked by cowboys and 9 of them killed." All of these varied reports caused confusion about the scale of Stuart's actions, with estimates of the number of victims ranging from 19 all the way to 100. Some saw this as illegal vigilante violence, and Stuart faced significant criticism. He never apologized, though, and claimed full responsibility. Veteran cowboy Teddy Blue recalled a woman accusing Stuart of hanging 30 men, to which Stuart replied, "Yes, madam, and by God, I did it alone." Due to the criticism, the names of the other rustlers were never publicly disclosed. In correspondence to fellow cattleman Conrad Coors, James Fergus later announced that his son Andrew and rancher Reese Anderson were part of Stuart's Stranglers. Fergus praised the operation for its bravery and effectiveness, saying it should never be forgotten. Stuart's Stranglers gained so much fame that even Teddy Roosevelt wanted to join them long after their disbandment. Others shared this sentiment. Ranch manager F.S. Stimson believed Stuart's vigilantes killed 38 thieves, stating that while some deputy sheriffs objected, the general view was that the hangings benefited stock interests. The editor of the Mineral Argus dismissed exaggerated rumors of the number of victims, asserting that the raid achieved its goal, evidenced by the reduction in thefts. The Montana Stock Growers Association displayed their gratitude by electing Stuart as president in the summer of 1884. Montana ranchers and Western historians at large wrote about Stuart's efforts for years. Less than a decade later, the Wyoming Stock Growers Association attempted to replicate Stuart's success, but their effort ended with even more bloodshed in the Johnson County War of 1892. Granville Stuart left the cattle industry after a severe winter of 1886 to 87, ruining the momentum of the business. In 1894, President Grover Cleveland appointed him as minister to Uruguay and Paraguay. He died in Missoula, Montana on October 2, 1918, but his Old West legacy had already been secured. The saga of Stuart's Stranglers, the Montana Vigilantes who ended the reign of livestock thieves on Independence Day, will be told across campfires all over the American frontier for eternity.